Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I'm joined by my co-host Jeff Cohen. As always, we are back today with an exciting episode of the Roundup. Baseball season's winding down. Winston-Salem finished up their season yesterday. We're going to dive into all of the teams' kind of season in reviews in a few weeks from now. But right now, we've got two playoff series to talk about today, Jeff. It's an exciting time. Kannapolis, as we're recording this on Monday the 9th, and it'll be out Tuesday morning. Tuesday night is the first playoff game for single-A baseball. Kannapolis is in a best 2 out of 3 with Charleston River Dogs. Jeff is heading to Charleston to see game 1 and then back to Kannapolis for game 2 and a potential game 3 tiebreaker. Really exciting stuff. Jeff's going to be our guy on the ground for that entire playoff series for the Kannapolis Cannonballers, which is single A. And then Birmingham is starting their playoffs next week. Next Tuesday the 17th kicks off the double A playoffs, and Birmingham as the first half Southern League North champions. They are going to be taking on the Tennessee Smokies in the first round of the double A Southern League playoffs. So we've got two playoff series to talk about. That's going to be the focus of today's episode. We're going to preview both of these playoffs. It's really cool to have two White Sox affiliates in the playoffs, right? This is something we haven't had in recent years very often. So it's going to be a really cool experience for fans. I encourage people to tune in and watch some of these games. There's a lot of really young talent and really exciting players on both these rosters that we're going to get to see come playoff time. So we're going to dive into both those playoff series today. Primarily going to get into a few players beforehand. But first of all, Jeff, how you doing? Are you excited for the playoffs?
Doing good, Elijah. Yeah, I'm pretty fired up. I'll be heading down to Charleston tomorrow and hope to get there in time to watch batting practice for the Ballers and pick Pat Leland's brain a little bit about, what his expectations are for the series. It's interesting. Both Kannapolis and Birmingham won their first half division championships. And of course, it's just the nature of minor league baseball. There've been a lot of promotions on both squads, and both teams look very different than they did at the start of the season, but should hopefully still be competitive. They still, Birmingham still has the pitching strength, and Kannapolis has the hitting strength.
Yeah, 100%. And they're two different teams, right? That's how it goes, right? You've got the ups and downs. That's minor league baseball, right? No team, very few minor league teams ever go into a season with one roster and then it remains the same all the way to the playoffs. It's just not the reality. Everybody, you want your players to be moving and you want them to be improving, but it is totally different teams. But at the same time, a lot of talent on both rosters, regardless of kind of the way the second half's gone for them as opposed to the first half. They both earn their playoff spots. That's how the minor leagues work. If you have a good first half with a core of guys, yes, some of them are going to get promoted, but you also earn a playoff spot, and they're both rolling into the playoffs, with some good talent, and it's going to be really fun to get to see them in high pressure situations, right? Like it's not the same as playing in the bigs, right? But for these guys, for a lot of these prospects, right, like this is the highest pressure situations they're going to feel this season, and that's a really good growth experience and learning experience for all of them, to say the least. So before we dive into the two in-depth playoff previews, we're going to start with the White Sox, and then we're going to mention a little bit in Charlotte, and then we're going to head down to these two playoff previews. Starting in Chicago, Jeff, there's two pitchers that I want to talk about a little bit because these are guys that are not going to get a ton of attention. They were never top prospects. They were never guys with a ton of pedigree. But Davis Martin and Fraser Ellard are two guys that got, Davis coming off an injury and Ellard coming off a promotion, right? They both got to Chicago mid-season, later in the year. The season was already kind of a lost cause, whatever you want to call it. And the two of them have pretty much locked down 2025 roster spots in my mind. I think these guys have come in and have done really, really good stuff to show that they deserve a spot on this roster heading into 25 and that they can be, a piece of the puzzle in terms of the pitching moving forward. So what have you kind of seen so far? And what do you think of what these two have been doing in Chicago?
Well, it's always exciting when a guy has TJ surgery and bounces back and gets all the way back, which Davis Martin has. And in fact, he's actually, added a pitch and become even a little more effective. So it's exciting to see. So what do you think his ceiling is, Elijah? Do you think maybe a SP3 here?
I don't know if I would go quite that far. I think we've seen definitely some ups and downs. I think we've seen some really good things. Generally, I don't think Martin's going to be ever going to be a guy that misses eight, 9 strikeouts in a game. Right, like he's not going to be that type of pitcher. He pitches to contact. He gets a lot of ground balls. He works counts pretty well. But in general, I don't think he's ever going to be, a dominant starter. But I do think you're looking at a guy who's a back-end starter and has proven that he deserves to be, the 4 starter. And next year considering the current status of the roster and how many young guys there are, he might be the 2 or 3 going into next year. But I think it's a long-term 4-starter profile, 4 or 5-starter profile, and a guy that I think, that kick change has made a huge difference for him. He's developed this alternative type of changeup they've been working through. It's a really kind of bitey, sharp changeup, and it's been really effective for him up to this point, and he's just turning in quality starts. I mean, it's not amazing, right? Like it's nothing. It's not his starts aren't blowing you away. He's had a few that have been really impressive. This past week was great. A 1-run 6-inning game with just consistent command. He looked like he was going after the zone for the most part, right? Like he looks good. I don't think he's a star, but I think this is a guy who, coming off of TJ, right? Like Martin he showed he had some stuff in 2022 when he first got called up to the big leagues. And then you were like, oh, this could be a nice piece going forward. And a year and a half later, we're now seeing the piece of Davis Martin, like end of 2024. Like we're seeing a guy that looks like a big league pitcher, whether it's as a back end starter, or even if he eventually settled into a long relief role potentially, depending on how the other pitchers coming up do, right? Like this is a big league pitcher, and that in itself is a victory for the White Sox right now. Switching over to Fraser Ellard. This is a guy that I was high on Ellard going into the season. I pegged him as one of the guys when we talked early on about like this guy should be in the White Sox bullpen at some point. Like he's going to be a pretty solid pen arm. Davis Martin has been great. Sorry, Fraser Ellard though has been really consistent. His first start, he got thrown into a ridiculous situation where he had runners on. It was late in the game. They were losing. It was just. There was no reason Ellard should have been thrown in that situation. He only got 1 out. He gave up 2 walks. He gave up 2 runs. Like it was just a rough debut, right? Since his debut, Jeff, Ellard has given up a total of 3 earned runs in his last 14 appearances since his debut. So he's made 15 appearances, and now in the last 14, he's allowed just 3 earned runs total. Ellard looks really good. He has not allowed an earned run since August 23rd. This is 7 straight games without a single earned run allowed for him. He's racking up, decent strikeouts. The walk rate is pretty low. Only, 7 walks total across 15 games now for Ellard. He is a bullpen piece, and then someone who, looks like he could be potentially even a 7th, 8th inning type bullpen piece moving forward. And clearly, has finally been given a chance, right? Like we have so many other guys that we want to be given a chance, right? But like they finally gave Ellard a chance for the last 2 months of the season. He come up at the end of at July, and he had a really rough debut, but since then has been continually put into, medium leverage situations and has done a good job and has been consistently steady. I mean, only 7 hits allowed in August across 9 games in August, and then has proceeded to go 4 games now in September with only a total of 3 hits allowed. He looks like a real bullpen piece.
Yeah, and it's exciting because now a little bit we're starting to see that 2025 bullpen take shape with Ellard and Jordan. We'll get to Charlotte in a minute, but Jordan Leisure is back on a rehab assignment. So those are 2 big arms that'll be there next year, and we know there are a couple of high value starters who 1 or 2 of them will probably end up in the pen next year. We've talked a lot about Sean Burke as an example. So we're starting to get an idea what the bullpen might look like next year.
Yeah, 100%. And Ellard has definitely claimed the spot, I think. I think it's become pretty clear, especially in his past week or 2 of his games, that he deserves a spot in this bullpen moving forward. So 2 arms that, obviously we have talked all year about how the pitching is well ahead of the hitting in terms of the organizational standpoint right now, and that's definitely the case. But 2 more pitchers that you now can factor into the big league plans going forward, and that's definitely a positive thing that has happened in the last month or 2 amidst a really rough stretch for the White Sox and rough season, obviously, in general. But some positive growth there. Heading down to Charlotte, there's a guy in Charlotte, Jeff, who just heated up in a big way. And, it was really cool when I got to talk to him. We got to talk to him in Charlotte and just kind of hear where he's at with his. And he was really open about it. But, it hasn't been the season Colson Montgomery wanted, right? Like it hasn't been the ideal season. He's had a lot of struggles. He's had a lot of growing pains. He's had to figure out how to adjust for the first time in his life. We've gone over this. We've talked about it. This week, Jeff, the first week of September, let me read you Colson Montgomery's numbers this week. 10 hits, 3 home runs, 5 RBIs, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts. That's good for a .417 batting average, a .792 slug. So he's OPSing over 1,200 this past week, and just looked good. Like that's really the way to, he's still striking out more than you want, right? Like that's the thing that is still there, but the power was apparent. 3 homers in his last 4 games to finish off the week. He was making consistent contact, driving the ball, and Colson just looked like, the version of Colson that we want to see for the rest of the year.
Yeah, hopefully he's not teasing us. Hopefully there's 2 more weeks to the season, and if he can have 2 more weeks like this week, I think everyone will be very much relieved and excited about what his prospects are in 2025.
100%. More at bats like this needs to happen. It looks like he's just being patient in the box. He's doing his thing. He's picking his pitches. He was able to hammer a breaking ball that I saw yesterday where he was just, he sat back on it. He wasn't caught off guard. I feel like he's gauging these breaking balls more now. I think that there's times in the season where he looked like he was just getting pounded with breaking balls and he didn't know how to react and he didn't know how to adjust quite as well. And he was chasing, either he was swinging too early or he was just straight up missing them when they were low in the zone. He looks like he's attacking, but he's also being patient and trying to find the better way to just approach his at-bats and really just make hard contact and drive the ball. He was hitting the ball really hard all week. It's great to see from Colson. And I think, like you said, if he can finish this entire month strong in Charlotte, it would be really nice to go into next year with a really good month under his belt because, he's had stretches this year, right? Like it's not that he hasn't had any stretches, right? Like even 2 weeks ago in Memphis when Charlotte was out there in August, he had a stretch of 3 games where he had 6 hits in 3 games and, a homer and done 2 doubles and whatever it was. And I was like, oh, this really nice few games there for Colson. But then he had 3 games in a row with no hits, right? So it's the up and down for sure. But this week was a really strong one. Got a hit in every single game this week. And I'm excited to see kind of what the next month, what is it? Only 2.5 weeks looks like for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And quickly, before we move on from Charlotte, just a couple of quick notes. Like our guy, Sean Burke, had another great outing. As I mentioned, Jordan Leisure is back on rehab. And then lastly, Yoan Moncada still in Charlotte. Hopefully that's where he finishes out the season, because if he goes up, that means someone comes back. So, we'll see how that plays out.
Well, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that goes. Moncada's been hitting well, though, to be fair, in Charlotte, of course. But, at the same time, like his White Sox tenure is over in 3 weeks. It's pretty much a given at this point. So I really don't see the purpose of activating a guy for 2-3 weeks. But I guess you want to give him one last ride in Chicago, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure what it really means at this point. I think everyone is essentially kind of tied the knot in the Yoan Moncada era, unfortunately. And it's just, it's how it goes, right? So we'll see what happens there. Yeah. But, Charlotte's got 2 more weeks. They'll finish out their season. It'll be nice to see some more games. Hopefully we'll get Edgar Carroll back on the field. He's been dealing with his injuries, his back injuries. So it'd be nice to get him a few more reps before the end of the season, but no reason to rush it at the same time. So we'll see how things play out. Obviously there's a lot of guys there that are worth watching in the next 2 weeks. But let's start our playoff preview. We're going to start in Birmingham, Alabama. The Barons had an insane first half of the season led by, a rotation that's most of the guys that are currently in Charlotte and some of in Chicago, right? So this roster, head to toe was just dominating in the first half of the season. But then you get promotions, guys like Brooks Baldwin, Tim Elko, Brian Ramos, all these guys get promoted. The offense loses a lot of its juice. You get a Noah Schultz, you get some other guys coming up, some Tyler Schweitzer, right? Some other pitchers that have come up and made an impact. But at the same time, you lose Mason Adams, Kai Bush, Jake Eater, and it goes Jairo Iriarte now is gone too. Iriarte would have been, a huge piece for the playoffs, but he gets called up to the White Sox, right? So there is a lot of turnover on this roster, like we talked about earlier. This is pretty much an entirely different roster, but still a lot of talent up and down this roster and a lot of guys that can make an impact. There's some new bats there that just got there to provide some offensive juice, some new hitters that have got there recently, including Rikui Nishida, who's definitely been a big add for them and is going to be a big piece of that playoff lineup. And then you've got on the pitching side, obviously Noah Schultz. Still unclear if Noah Schultz is going to be, available for a playoff game. I think in terms of his normal Saturday schedule, if the Barons were to have a Thursday or Friday playoff game, which they will have a Thursday one, Friday's the tiebreaker potentially, he would be able to throw those games. I'm not sure if the White Sox want to push that. They might want to just, call his season done at the end of the regular season. He had a great year. You're very productive in getting him 4 innings every week, right? Like, not clear, but there's a lot of depth behind that. So let's go through a little bit of this roster, Jeff, and talk about who kind of some of the players are in the playoffs and then who they're going to be playing, which is an interesting team. It's a nice little crosstown. The White Sox AA in the Birmingham Barons and the Cubs AA in the Tennessee Smokies is the Southern League, but North Division. It's kind of funky how they like to label. I feel like they could come up with better names, but the Southern League North Division playoffs is between the Barons and the Smokies, and then they play the winner of the South Division, which is the Montgomery Biscuits against likely the Biloxi Shuckers, who haven't quite clinched yet, but are expected to be that other team. So the Southern League playoffs are going to be, really fun. So it's a best of 3, the 2 different best of 3 series, and then the winners play in another best of 3 series for the championship series for the Southern League. So the Barons will kick off on the 17th. Jeff, I think we're going to get a mixture of Tyler Schweitzer, Juan Corella, potentially Riley Gowans, and then maybe a Noah Schultz if they want to have him for one of those last game or two. What do you think about, going into the postseason with that rotation for the Barons?
It's exciting because they lost a lot of great arms out of that Birmingham rotation, a lot of high upside guys, Drew Thorpe, Iriarte, on and on and on. But they've been replaced by some really strong arms. These guys have a decent track record down in Birmingham, and I think they'll be very competitive. They have the potential to be very competitive.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I'd like to see Tyler Schweitzer get one of those first games, if not the first
Mhm.
one. I think he's someone who, this year has really grown into his own. And I think it's like we saw him in Winston. And we're like, oh, this is a decent high floor arm, a guy that pounds the zone, left hander, right? But he has just kept it up all season. Like he hasn't wavered really. I mean, you look at the numbers, right? And he just has continued to be good at every level, right? He had a 3.74 in Winston in 9 starts this year, and then followed it up with a 3.87 so far in Birmingham. And it's just been a steady pitcher. He doesn't walk a ton of guys. He has a good amount of strikeouts, at 128 strikeouts this season, only 37 walks. He attacks the zone. He's going to give up some hard hit balls here and there. He doesn't throw super hard, right? But at the same time, Schweitzer just knows how to get after hitters. And I think, come playoffs, I think he's the type of pitcher that you'd like to have starting a game for you, because he can just give you a solid game.
Yeah. And, the guys who don't start, Bockenstad, Vale, coming 100%. Out of the bullpen. And, of course, I know we talked about this guy a lot last week, but he continues to do it, and that's Peyton Paulette.
Yeah.
He now has 13 straight 2-inning appearances, no earned runs.
Just phenomenal stuff. Yeah, pretty unreal.
And we talked about, the 2025 White Sox bullpen starting to come into shape. This is another important piece of he does this in spring training. He's got to be up there in 2025.
100%. So looking at the bullpen, right? Like these starters, like it's a much less experienced group of starters than, they started the year with in Birmingham, which makes it a little trickier. But if these starters can give, a 5-inning start in a playoff game, the bullpen's got the depth for a 3-game series. This bullpen has the depth to just dominate at points if they can really maximize each of these guys. You've got Eric Adler, you've got Andrew Dahlquist, you've got Zach Franklin. You just mentioned Peyton Paulette. You've got Caleb Freeman, you've got Gil Luna, Jordan Michael, Chase Plymel. I mean, there is guys up and down this entire bullpen. Garrett Shanley has been starting lately because of Iriarte going up, but is a bullpen guy as well. Typically, you've got guys in this entire bullpen who can give you really quality innings. So I think you're going to be looking at starters. If you can give Schweitzer or Gowans or Corella the ball and say, can you get us 5 good innings? If they can get you 5 good innings, even against a strong Tennessee team, this bullpen could really be a difference maker come playoff time.
Yeah. And like you said, maybe there's a chance they decide to throw Noah Schultz in on the Friday game. And if that happens, then you bump another one of those starters into the bullpen, and you're just even deeper.
Yeah, 100%. It sets up pretty well. They've got a good setup for the playoffs, and I think that's the pitching is going to have to be the focal point, right? The offense has definitely struggled in the second half generally, but on the offensive side of the ball, you got Jacob Gonzalez leading the way, who has been better lately. Jacob Gonzalez has had a rough year in Birmingham since he got there generally, but has been pretty decent lately. He's had some really nice at-bats of recently that I've been watching. Rikui Nishida is the recent ad there, right? He just came up from Winston last week. I was able to be on that one, and he, is just a table setter, right? When you've got a guy like Nishida at the top of the lineup, it's gonna annoy opposing pitchers more than anything, and it's gonna just work them and work their counts in a way that very few hitters at this age and level are able to do. You've also got Mario Camilletti, who's another type of that, work counts, force pitchers into bad situations, right? Like they both are that profile early in a count, which is it's really helpful to have. Wilfred Veras has had an exceptionally strong last month or two of his season. He's hitting the ball really well lately. This is a guy who should be, the masher in that middle of the order, right? Then you've got guys like Terrell Tatum, you've got Michael Turner, you've got DJ Gladney, you've got a variety of veteran and kind of experienced minor league guys there who hopefully are going to be able to make an impact in that lineup as well. So it's very different as a lineup. It doesn't have a Tim Elko. It doesn't have a Brooks Baldwin hitting 600 or whatever Brooks Baldwin was hitting in Birmingham. But there is talent in this lineup still, and they can just, get some quality runs on the board. I think you've got a deep enough pitching staff that can really carry you in the playoffs.
And then, Elijah, what do you see in terms of their opponents? I know that they were a tough team early in the year, but where do they stand now?
So it's interesting. The Tennessee Smokies is the Cubs AA affiliate, right? This is a team that had, their second half has been insane, right? Like they have a 44-19 record in the second half of the season this year. But with that said, Jeff, they have lost a lot of their talent recently, much like the Barons have at some points. The Tennessee Smokies started with, I believe, 4 of the Cubs' top 5 prospects on that roster to start the year. And now every single one of those prospects hitting, especially on the hitting side, is in AAA Iowa now. So while the Smokies are, their record is strong and they've got a lot of talent on their roster, they have lost essentially their entire middle first half of their order in the past month now. They had guys like Jacob Tristanos, they had guys like Kevin Alcantara, Matt Shaw. These are all top 100-esque prospects in baseball that every single one of those guys is now in AAA because the Cubs are focused on, obviously you have to be focused on the next steps, right? So it's an interesting dynamic with the Smokies because their roster indicates, they're one of the best teams in minor league baseball. Their record, pardon me, but their roster shows a team that is missing a lot of their pieces and isn't quite the team that we saw early in the year. They've got a Christian Franklin, who's a pretty, established hitter. BJ Murray's had a pretty good season there. Jonathan Long's been a breakout candidate from last year's draft for them. But in general, you got a lot of holes that the Smokies are still trying to patch, much like the Barons have been doing for the past month now.
All right. Well, that sounds like in that regard, it sounds like it's going to be a very competitive series.
It should be a very competitive series. I think we're going to see, a really tight series. I think we're going to see a good series. It looks like to me that, they play this week too. So it's interesting because you've got this week, the last regular season matchup is Birmingham and Tennessee. So you essentially have an entire week of a playoff preview before they then turn around 2 days later and play each other in the playoffs. Really funny how minor league baseball works. That's not something you would ever see, really at the pro level where you basically they're going to play the same team for 9 straight games after already playing them a bunch this season. So pretty crazy little situation there. That's going to be happening for the Barons and the Smokies, right? But if it's a good experience for those listening, right? If you want to preview the playoffs, you got 6 games to do it basically this week, and then from there we'll see what happens. So it's going to be an exciting series. I think the Barons are in a decent spot. I think it's going to have to come down to, can they get enough runs on the board? The offense has been very up and down for Birmingham the past second half of the season, especially. So if they can get enough runs on the board, I think they're going to have a real shot. And it would be really awesome if we can get a Noah Schultz playoff game. Definitely still up in the air, but it would line up potentially well for him to be pitching the winner take all game 3 of that series. So we'll see what happens. And then if they advance, if they beat the Smokies, they would advance to play the winner of Montgomery and likely Biloxi. It looks like they're about to clinch in the next day or two here. Montgomery is another phenomenal team. We're going to talk about a Rays system in a few minutes here with Kannapolis, who they're facing, but the Rays minor league levels, every single team in that organization in the minor league level is a force to be reckoned with. So the Barons will look to beat the Smokies and then probably get a matchup with either Montgomery or Biloxi, who's the Brewers affiliate. So that's what's happening. We're a week out from that, and they'll be taking on the Smokies this whole week and then all of next week in the playoffs. But it's a funny situation, right?
Really bizarre. That's so bizarre.
Pretty unique. 9 straight games against a team is not something you really ever would see at the higher levels at the highest level of baseball. Let's head down to Kannapolis. Let's dive into this Kannapolis Cannonballers playoff because Jeff and I were there, and I was there in person a few weeks ago with Jeff, which was awesome. And we've been able to, both of us have been really kind of keyed in on Canny, I think, more than in past years this year because there was a ton of talent there last year to start the season from last year's draft class, and then this second half of the season we've seen a ton of talent from the current draft class that just got drafted 2 months ago. In addition to some of these young holdover stars like a Walco, like a Burrows, like a Ronnie Hernandez, right? So there's this really fun blend on this roster in Canny. Jeff, can you just set the scene for this Canny playoffs a little bit?
All right. Well, like you said, a lot of turnover on the Kannapolis roster. Pretty much 5 of their 6 starters on opening day have advanced to Winston-Salem, and that doesn't include Grant Taylor. So it's a completely different pitching staff, and that's going to be the real challenge for the team is they don't quite have the replacements that they like they had at the start of the year with a really powerful rotation. Also, there's been a lot of turnover in the offense for the Ballers, but they've been replaced by half a dozen college bats, and a couple of those guys are really hitting. The team is hitting well in general. And so it's going to be the offense that needs to carry the day for sure. But their opponent is going to be tough. Like you said, it's another Rays affiliate. And the Rays minor league teams, they play to win all season long. And the strength of this team is going to be its pitching staff. They've got, I believe, 8 of their top 30 minor league prospects on the Charleston lineup, and their starters are 3 of those. They got Gary Gill Hill, and they've got
Santiago
Drew,
Suarez is a stud.
Yes, Suarez, and then Drew Dowd, who was a 2023 draft pick, I believe, and those 3 guys, they all went over 100 innings this year. Maybe there'll be a little fatigue, and that'll work to the Ballers' benefit. But these guys, We're in the top 5 in the league in WHIP and batting average against, and Drew Dowd was the ERA leader. So it's going to be 3 really tough starters that their ballers are going to have to face.
Yeah, it's an incredibly strong team. Charleston is a tough squad. I mean, in the second half this year, Charleston has a 42-23 record. They've had a few promotions, but really not that many, which is pretty scary to face. That's Kannapolis, like we talked about, has had a lot of guys go up and a lot of guys keep moving. On the other hand, Charleston has a lot of their same core guys that have been there all season and have continued to dominate. They really value their minor league development in that system, and they just let these guys keep working there. On the Canny side, right? So Kannapolis has a rotation that's still kind of being scrapped together, right? You've got a lot of these 2024 draft class guys that have just come in. So the rotation and the pitching staff in general has been a little bit all over the place the past few weeks. It's been up and down. However, I think we have kind of deduced what we think is going to be the playoff rotation based on when guys have been throwing, based on who's been the most consistent. Tanner McDougal got the start last Monday for Canny, so he hasn't started in over a week, which means leads me to believe he's going to start the playoff game tomorrow, Tuesday the 10th, as we're talking on Monday. McDougal is someone who has had a rough year in Winston, but got bumped, kind of sent back down to Canny to reset, to regather himself. His stuff is at the single A level, his stuff is great, right? Like, we know that he's got to figure out the command at the next level. He's got to figure out how to adjust to higher level hitting. In single A, Tanner is one of the best guys you could be throwing in a playoff game, I think. I think the stuff is extreme. If he can command it, he's going to be a really strong starter. And then we think the likely 2 and 3 starters, based on just how they've been throwing this year and where the sequencing with rest, would be Jake Peppers and Ricardo Brizuela. Peppers was a 2023 draft pick, a guy that, we were really, I've always been fond of. I think his stuff is really good. His command is kind of iffy at times, but generally Peppers, really has some lively stuff that can get a lot of whiffs. We were there when we saw him in person. He looked excellent this year a few weeks ago. So has been an up and down year, but Peppers has been growing into himself and finding himself as a pitcher this season. He's been in Canny all season. He's got that experience. He seems like the perfect game 2 playoff candidate for me. And then Ricardo Brizuela, who is an international signing, just nothing but your, command, right? Brizuela is a guy that we've seen this year. Like, the stuff is not overwhelming. It's not going to be overwhelming, and he throws, 90-ish or so, but at the same time, he pounds the zone. He attacks the strike zone. He's been doing it all season. In Canny, he's made 10 starts in Canny, and he has, let me see this number. This is kind of crazy. 10 walks in 10 starts, right? So he's not walking guys. He's pounding the zone. He's doing his job. It's been a solid year from him all around. He had a great time. He was succeeding a lot in the ACL in Arizona, and then made his way to Canny and has been really steady in Canny as well. So, those 3 guys are the most likely starters, I think. And then the bullpen is a really big blend, but a lot of these 2024 draft pick guys that just got there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think led by Aaron Combs, who was an 8th round draft pick. They drafted a reliever, and he's been really effective in 6
100%.
games. I think opponents are hitting 179. He's only got 4 walks and 13 strikeouts in 7.2 innings. So he will be of great interest to see what he does. And then, you got guys like Nick Pinto, who was a 19th round draft pick. He's also off to a good start in a small sample.
Yeah, he made his first start this week, so he's got some experience. He probably could be out of the bullpen. Carlton Perkins has been solid lately. Justin Sinibaldi's made a few starts now. It's another 2024 draft pick. You've got guy Mason Moore just made his first start this past week. It was a rough start for him, but he could definitely be a bullpen piece come playoffs. And then you've got the other 2024 guys in Pierce George, who's got plenty of stuff, has been off to a bit of a shaky start in Canny, but one of the most highly touted, relievers in this past draft. Klett Hartzog was an undrafted free agent who has really looked pretty strong in his first few appearances in Canny, right? So you've got a rotation, or just a pitching staff in general, just filled with all these recent draft picks, guys that are still kind of, in their early development process, but there's a lot to like there. And then you've got some holdover guys that have been there most of the season, and Jesus Mendez. You've got, who else is in that group? Franklin Arias is there. There's some other guys that have been there for a while as well. Mark McLaughlin, right? So there's a lot of options you can turn to. I think you can really play the matchups well in this series, which is kind of fun. The other cool thing about just a 3-game series, right, is you can really let a guy loose, right? Like, if a guy's rolling, you can let him roll because you only have max 3 games to play that week. So it is definitely, you can really ride the guys that are doing what you're expecting them to do. So the pitching staff is up and down. There's a lot of mixed bag of pitchers in this lineup. You don't really know exactly what you're getting quite yet from some of these guys, just because they're just the beginning of their professional careers. But how good of experience is that for all these guys that just got drafted to get a chance to throw in a playoff game and just have that excitement and have that energy around it?
Yeah, and you're right. That's going to be really fascinating. I'm sure they're going to turn Pat Leland loose and say, go try and win this. Don't worry about player development. So if that's the case, it's going to be interesting to see which arms he feels most comfortable relying on in these, especially high leverage situations. Because like you said, it's got over a dozen options to choose from, and not everybody is going to get a shot.
Yeah, 100%. Going over to the offensive side of the ball for Kannapolis, there's some guys that are hitting right now. And you've got a lineup that, like I mentioned earlier, there's a really fascinating blend of young, long-term, project prospects, right? And then your 2024 draft guys who are experienced, have college experience, and are coming in off of their college seasons and have already played, tons of games this season, starting in March, right? If they were college guys, but are now in a situation where they get to kind of re-experience what they were doing in college, which was a lot of, playoff. A lot of these guys played in the playoffs in college and in the tournament and everything. And now you've got the chance to get that second wave of kind of playoff atmosphere led by, Sam Antonacci, who has claimed this, very clearly claimed the top of the order, either 1 or 2 spot in this lineup. I think he's going to be the one hitter there for this playoffs. I don't really see how he wouldn't be. Antonacci has been exceptional. This is a guy who I liked him coming out of the draft. We talked about him. It was cool to get to hear kind of where he's at in his head when I was in Canny, but he has just been great. His approach is excellent. His contact skills are excellent. This is a guy who is the definition of a table setter. He just makes a ton of contact, 17 walks to 13 strikeouts. He doesn't whiff. He is patient. He finds his pitches and he just makes contact all the time. This is the perfect guy to be starting a playoff series, I think, at the top of the order, right? And then beyond that, you've got all these other draft picks, in Alec Makowitz, Lyle Miller-Green, Nathan Archer, TJ McCants. It's just up and down Jackson Appel up and down the roster. And then that's balanced out with, your other young guys, right? Joral Perez, George Wolko, Rony Hernandez. That's kind of that 3-man core of those super young, high-level projection guys, right? So it's a really fun, balanced lineup. Definitely some ups and downs, and there's definitely a lot of guys in this lineup that strike out, Jeff. I think that's one thing that we have a lot of guys in this lineup who are, again, they're young, right? Like this is single A is the time for that. If there's a time to be chasing and swinging a little too often, it's single A. But this is the type of lineup that can take off. If this lineup gets hot and they're all rolling, this is a lineup that can put up 15 runs in a game. It's also a lineup that can strike out 20 times in a game, right? So it's up and down,
Yeah, but you're right. We've got 3 or 4 guys who are coming in really hot who had a great last couple of weeks. You mentioned Antonacci and AMAC. Joral Perez has done well. Rony Hernandez has done well. The one guy who's kind of struggled, unfortunately, because he's looked really good early at most of the season, is George Wolkow. It's been a rough last couple of weeks for him, but he's a game changer. He can really, he can win a game on his own.
That's 100% how it goes, right? That's what it is. I mean, that's the type of guy who, we know what Wilco can do. Like, we know what he's capable of, right? And there's been a ton of strikeouts this year, and he's had a rough few weeks. But at the same time, like, this is also the most games he's ever played in the season by far. Like, you got to remember, this is a high school guy. This is a high school guy who went through, ups and downs of high school seasons, and now he's here and he's ready. So Walco could be a game changer. There's plenty of guys, right? Like this entire lineup has a lot of talent up and down, and players that I think we know can get going. So this is a lineup that I think there's a real world where this lineup just catches fire and they just destroy. But like you mentioned, going over to the Charleston side of things, they got some arms there, Jeff. They got some serious arms in Charleston. So this is going to be a really fun battle of, a balanced, exciting lineup for Canny against some pitching in Charleston that's tough. I expect, like you mentioned, the 3 guys you mentioned are probably going to be the starters. I mean, it's hard to gauge, I guess, what their pitching limits might be from the Rays, but, Gary Gilhill is a 3.15 ERA across 108 innings this year. And then you've got guys like, you've got a guy like Santiago Suarez, who has, let's pull up these numbers here. It's up and down. They just are talented, and they have numbers, they have success, they have talent, right? Suarez has a 4.11 this year, which is kind of misleading because his numbers are really strong. He has 115 strikeouts and only 21 walks this season. That's about as good as it gets in terms of command stuff combination at that level and that age. And then you've got another guy like Drew Dowd, who has also been really strong throughout most of the season. Has a 2.85 this season, more of a command over stuff guy, but there's talent in this roster. I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert on this roster because we don't watch Charleston the way we watch Kannapolis. But at the same time, there is a lot of talent up and down that lineup and roster.
Yeah, those are 3 starters with some impressive stats. Whips of 111, 111, 120. Walks to strikeouts, 21, 115, 27, 105, 9, 99. That's insane. 9 and 99.
Yeah. And then even their four starter per se, I don't even think he can be qualified as a four starter. TJ Nichols is another guy that was a 2023 draft pick for them, has a 2.9 ERA in 70 innings since getting up healthy and getting to Charleston, right? So there is a lot of pitching talent on that team. On the offensive side of the ball, that's where I think I lean that Canny has a little bit of an edge there. Honestly, I do think that the Kannapolis roster has a little bit of a deeper roster when it comes to hitting talent. But there's still some serious bats. Aiden Smith is a stud. Aiden Smith is a guy that was acquired by the Rays from the Mariners earlier in midseason at the deadline in the Randy Arozarena trade. Aiden Smith he's good, that's for sure. He's been exceptionally good in the past month or so. You've got recent draft picks in Theodore Gillen, Emilian Petrie. Those are two of their top draft picks recently. Adrian Santana's had a strong season. They do have plenty of talent on this roster up and down.
Yeah, you're right. Like I said, 8 of their top prospects are on this team, and several are, a couple of really good middle infielders. But I did some comparisons just to give us a little perspective on offense.
Yeah.
And I looked at the last 30 days. That gives you a pretty good idea just how well a team's playing.
Definitely.
And that's a pretty decent sample. And Kannapolis is number 1 in the league over the last 30 days with a .253 batting average. While Charleston's 7th at .230. Home runs, Kannapolis is out home run Charleston 15-12. Kannapolis is 3rd best in the league over the last month, and on base percentage at .342. Same thing. Kannapolis was number 1 in hits over the last 30 months. I mean, like you said, these guys have really been hitting, and if they win this series, it's because these guys hit their way to the series. Now, Charleston, they don't hit a lot of home runs, not a powerful team, but they run a lot. So the key is going to be to keep them off the bases and hold the run as best you can.
I'm very curious to see what the catching situation looks like for Canny in the playoffs, because there's been a big emphasis on letting Ronnie Hernandez develop this year. I think that's been something they've really wanted to give Ronnie the chance to have an entire season catching pretty frequently and let him develop as a catcher and a game caller and everything. Jackson Appel, though, is a 5-year D1 catcher, right? Like, this is a guy who it's a totally different type of player. There's a huge difference between a international catcher who's developing and is 19 years old still, right? Like, Ronnie Hernandez is 19, Jeff. Like, I think we think of him as a little older almost because he's been there all season. He's been in the organization for a little while, right? Like, he had a really good year in Arizona last year in the Complex League. He's 19, and Jackson Appel is 22 or 23, I think now. 23 with, a ton of college experience, has a strong arm too. I'm curious if they're going to lean more on Appel for the playoff games for the sake of, his defensive experience and just ability to, catch big games, and let Ronnie DH more potentially in these games.
Well, I was wondering about that myself, and I thought, one solution is to put Ronnie at designated hitter.
Right.
And put what's his name, Lyle Miller Green on the bench. He hadn't been hitting that great, and he's been playing designated hitter a lot. So that could be one way to approach it. And I guess a lot depends on matchups as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of options, definitely. I mean, you've got a deep lineup, like we've talked about, right? Like, Jaral Perez is going to be in there. Antonacci's has to be in there at this point. Antonacci's been too good not to be in there. But then you want a guy like Ryan Burroughs in there too. I know he hasn't had a great season, but that's still one of the more experienced Canny players, right? And a guy you trust throughout the season, right? In the outfield, it's going to have to be somewhat of a platoon, right? Like, you've got Walco, even with his struggles lately, you want that in your lineup, right? You don't want to not have that in your lineup. TJ McCants has been a pretty good impact player since getting there, draft pick, right? Experienced, has that SEC playoff type of experience, right? Like, that's the type of thing you want in your playoff lineup. Nathan Archer, though, has also been a solid piece. He's been hitting pretty well since he's been there. He's had some ups and downs, but that's a speedster. Maybe Archer's your pinch run guy, maybe. They're going to have to mix and match for sure. It's going to be kind of a throwing things together, switching it up, changing it out. But, it's a tough matchup. But Canny is a team that could really do this thing. I mean, this is the best team that we've seen in Canny in quite some time this year, throughout the year, even with some ups and downs and a lot of roster turnover. Like, they've had a really good season the entire year and just been a team that, if they can get rolling, I think they could really do some damage in this playoff series.
Yeah, and one guy you neglected, Drake Logan. I think they're a little more experienced. I think they get him and he could be a difference maker. So, yeah, 100%. A lot of options, and it's going to be fascinating to see the lineup and the pitching staff starting staff that Pat Leland rolls out.
Definitely. And then if this team were to advance, they would play in the Carolina League Championship. They would face the winner of the Carolina Mudcats and the Fredericksburg Nationals, which are the Brewers and Nationals single A affiliates. So, there is a lot of talent. I think the Brewers, Nationals, and Rays are probably three of the better. I don't want to. Definitely all top 10, I think, in baseball right now in farm system. I think they're all three arguably top 6 or 7 probably in baseball right now in terms of their farm systems. And they all have done really well in drafts recently. The Brewers and Rays and Nationals have all have some really strong drafts lately. So these are three, single A clubs with a ton of recent draft picks on them, a lot of talent up and down. It is not going to be an easy battle for Kannapolis in the first round or in the potential championship round if they were to make it, right? But it's going to be fun. I'm excited for you that you get to go there. I think it's going to be a really cool thing to see, 2 White Sox affiliates in playoff ball.
Yeah, I'm fired up. My bag's packed. I'm heading out in the morning.
There you go. Let's do some predictions. As long as we're here and we're talking about these series, we'll start with Birmingham and then we'll go to Kenny. Birmingham in their 3 games against the Tennessee Smokies. Jeff, what is your prediction for that series?
Well, do I want to be a homer? You know what? I am going to be a homer, and let's not only predict who wins, but why. And I think the difference maker in the Birmingham series will be the Birmingham pitching staff. I think they get it done. That their opponents are a lot weaker with all the call-ups. I think this pitching staff can handle the pressure and get it done and win a couple of close, low-scoring games. What do you think?
I'm with you. I think it's going to be a 3-game series. I think it's going to go all the way. I think both teams are going to get one, and I think it's going to go to game 3. And I think if he's healthy and able and they allow him to, I think a Noah Schultz game 3 playoff clinch would be pretty incredible to see. I think there's a real chance we could see that, honestly. I do. I think if he comes into that game and he's had some ups and downs in his past few starts, but I think if we can get a game 3 Noah Schultz start with even 3-4 innings of him and then turn it over to a Corella or a Gowans or something out of the bullpen, or even a Sean Lee who has experience as a piggyback, right? I think the pitching staff can do it. I think they can hold it down, and I think the Smokies lineup is not what it was. I think we're going to get a good sense of that this week. You're going to see a lineup that's definitely not the same lineup it was earlier in the season, and I think Birmingham takes it in 3 games. I think Noah Schultz pitches that last game, and I think they clinch it out in a 3rd game, and they go on to the championship. And I'm not making any promises to come to the championship because Montgomery is a terrifying team, but I think they're going to take down the Smokies and give the White Sox a little bit of pride over the Cubs for the season.
Fantastic. And what about the Canny series? How do you see that?
Kenny's tough. It really is. It's a tough series. I think this team can do it. Just for the sake of keeping the argument fresh. I think this one's going to go to 3-2. I think there's a good chance it goes to 3. I think that, you can hopefully get a solid start. I think maybe Kenny comes out strong and takes a game 1 against with McDougal on the bump. And then I don't know. We'll go with Kenny. Might as well. We might as well. I think the difference maker. We're going to go with our teams because we follow these teams. So I'm going to go with Kenny in 3 games. But I do think one of the biggest difference makers is going to be one of these young hitters, right? I think we're going to get a huge game from a young hitter, and that Sam Antonacci is going to line the table. He's going to be great, I think, throughout the whole series. And then I think we're going to get a huge game from either a Rony Hernandez or a George Wolko. One of these young guys that's been there all season for the most part, has been there most of the season, is going to step up and just have a huge home run of some sort, and that's going to be the way they win one of these games.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think we both will agree that if we had to put money on it, we wouldn't bet on Canny because they've got a tough task ahead of them. They're facing 3 really tough pitchers, but they can do it. They're the best hitting team coming into the playoff in the league. And if they can just get just enough pitching, I think, their offense could scratch out some runs against these tough pitchers and pull it out.
Yeah, and maybe, who knows, this will be my little sneaky prediction will be that Aaron Combs gets the save to finish it off, just like he did for Tennessee in the College World Series this year. So you never know. Give him a second playoff clinching save of the season.
All right. Well, my player of the series for Kannapolis, I don't know why, but I'm going to go with Drake Logan.
There you go. He's experienced. He's been there. He knows Canny well. He's been hitting at that really well lately for sure. So that's not a bad pick at all.
All right.
Well, that'll do it. I think that's all we got for this week. We're gonna have some differences coming up. I'm heading to Europe this week, so Jeff will be joined by Dylan Barnas, our guy Dylan, who's been on the show a handful of times. Dylan and Jeff will host next week as my first week. I think my first week out in quite some time. But I will. The 2 of them will take over next week. They're going to do a great job reacting to the Canny playoff series. Jeff is going to talk about his in-person experience being at all these playoff games, which is going to be great. I can't wait to listen to that. Those 2 will have next week, and then hopefully I might be a little bit of a delayed episode, but in 2 weeks I will be back later in the week, and we'll get another episode in, starting to do some season recaps. We'll recap the Winston-Salem season. At that point, Canny will be done, and Birmingham will be done as well. So we'll recap all their seasons. Eventually, we'll recap the Knights season once AAA finishes up, and then we're gonna have some awesome content in the offseason. I'm actually really excited for some of this content because we're gonna get more player interviews once the season ends. I'm hoping to get a bunch of players on and talk to them. So should have a lot of player interviews lined up for the offseason. Me and Jeff are going to talk about, predicting some stuff, looking at the future, looking at, the season in review, looking at some prospects we think can break out in 2025. There is a ton to do even when there's not games on. So everybody, I highly encourage you to watch the Kannapolis playoffs this week. Jeff, have a wonderful time there. And I will not talk to you next week, but Dylan will be here with Jeff next week. And then I'll talk to you all in a few weeks. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, Elijah, if you decide to call in from Spain, we'd love to hear from you. If not, safe travels, and we'll check in with you when you get back.
Sounds wonderful. Appreciate it, Jeff. All right, that'll do it for the future.